Hey guys, and welcome to a new series here on Thelearningdroid. Building off my pyrography series, I thought I'd do a series of little bits of advice. I'm going to do a series on picking the right pyrography machine and things, but I'm going to wait until I've got a couple of other machines to show you. Hello feline. This is my family's cat. So I thought I'd start off the advice series with picking the right sort of wood for pyrography. In the box, good girl. So the first wood we're going to look at is basswood. It's also called limewood or Lindel Wood, and that depends on the particular species of tree and where it's grown and what the general naming habit is around there. We're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages. So first off, bass, lime and Lindel wood all comes from one genus of tree called Tilia, or Tilia, I'm not quite sure on the pronunciation. It's a reasonably hard wood with a very, very fine, very, very even grain. I don't know if you're close enough to see it, but we've got a very nice, fine, even grain. Just turn that over so that you can't see the brand. There's about 30 species of Tilia tree, and depending on where it's grown depends on what it's named. This is Californian bass, so it comes from Tilia californicus, which is quite nice. And we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages. So the advantages of basswood as far as pyrography go. First off, it's really readily available. Basswood is really popular as a modelling wood. So if you go to any modelling shops or any shops that sell modelling wood for building model aircraft, model doll houses, things like that, you're likely to find basswood on sale. The big advantage with that is that it comes in pre-finished, pre-cut pieces. For instance, this is a modelling piece. It's got a very fine finish, nice and smooth, decent even grain. It's been cut to exactly 4 inches wide. When I first bought it, it was exactly 2 foot long, or 3 foot long, can't remember, 3 foot I think. And it means that you can easily get hold of it. It's not difficult to work with. You don't have to have a lot of woodworking material, so it's very good for beginner pyrographers who aren't necessarily woodworkers, who just want to try pyrography. Another advantage with it is that because it's got a very even density across the grain, you don't get skipping as you do pyrography. With ones that have a big variation in density, like pine, between dark grain and light grain, what you'll find is as you draw the pyrography pen, pyrography nib across the wood, unless you're very careful, you'll find that it rises and falls with the grain, because as it burns into the wood, it burns more shallowly into the dark parts of the grain than the light parts of the grain, so it will fall into the light parts of the grain and you'll get an uneven burn. Don't have that problem with basswood. It's a very, very smooth burn. It takes up laser printed patterns beautifully. It takes up the ink of laser printed patterns really well. Doesn't go too deep, so it's nice and even. A couple of disadvantages, of course, as no wood has all advantages when it comes to pyrography. The first disadvantage is when you come to finish it, the end grain of basswood is far more thirsty than other woods. So if you're finishing it with an oil, you can get tracking stains running down the wood if you're not very careful with how much oil you apply to the end grain, because the end grain will just drink endlessly. Not so bad with varnish. You've seen some of my pieces finished with varnish, I'm sure, on the Facebook page, Tom Spott's Custom Pyrographies, but it still does drink the end, so you'll get a much darker grain on the end. It's not hard to work with. It's not so dense that you need any special strength of sanding paper or special extra sharp blades or anything like that. You can cut it with a standard saw. I use a ice bear saw, which is a Japanese style saw, but it cuts very well. It's reasonably easy to work with. When you get it from a modelling shop, just run 400 or 600 grit sandpaper over it a couple of times, because it has a slight not grainy effect, it has a slight fuzziness from where they've finished it in modelling shops. But that's fine, and once that's done, it will burn nice and evenly. The only other disadvantage with it, apart from the end grain and the difficulty of finishing, is that well, there's two other disadvantages. The first one is that it scorches quite easily. compared with some other woods. So if you're looking for a deep burn, then you want to do it in stages rather than just doing a constant deep burn, otherwise you'll get scorch around. The other issue is that, especially when bought in thin sheets, not so much when bought in blocks like cubes, but when bought in thin sheets like this, if you do a lot of central burning or a lot of burning down with the grain, basswood is, all woods will do this, but basswood does it more. It will curve because you are drying the wood in the centre. Sorry, it will curve this way because you're drying the wood in the centre, causing the fibres to shrink, so it will bend up at the sides. Now basswood does this slightly more than other woods, as far as I can tell. It's not impossible to deal with. I'll do a video on dealing with that later. As I said, I'll also do a video on picking the right pyrography machine for you. But as I said, Basswood Advantages, it's readily available, comes pre-finished from modelling shops, it's got a nice smooth burn because there's no unevenness in the grain, and it's quite easy to work with. It takes up a laser printed pattern quite well. The disadvantage is it scorches while you're pyrographing. The end grain is very thirsty, so you might get staining running down from the end grain if you leave too much oil on it or if you stain it too deeply. And it will also be darker if you varnish it. And finally, if you do a lot of centralized burn or if you do line burn down the grain, it's more likely that you'll get a curved result. Once again, that is fixable. So later on we'll be looking at different kinds of wood, so I'll look at a beechy, pine, oak, things like that. We'll also be looking at different ways of getting hold of wood easily and cheaply. This is one of the easiest but not one of the cheapest. Basswood in the UK for a 4-inch wide plank that is either 2 or 3 foot long, I can't remember. Does it say on it? 2 foot. 4-inch wide plank that's 2 foot long and a 1/4 inch thick, you're looking at paying about £5 from an online retailer. If you get it from a hobby shop, you're going to be looking at paying about £7. So that's quite expensive. However, it comes pre-finished, there's very little work for it. We'll also be looking at different kinds of pyrography machine, ways to deal with curves, things like that. So I hope this helped, and I'll see you next time.